Thank you. We have recovered the wolves and the grizzly bear in Wyoming, and we do a dang good job of managing both. I also think that we have to return to the old adage that from the Bible that says, those who hate wisdom love death, and that summarizes radical environmentalists' obsession with predators over the many years. When talking about wolves in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, the recovery goal for each of those states is 150 wolves. That was agreed to by the Forest Fish and Wildlife Service, the state of Wyoming, and has also been approved by the Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. Both Idaho and Montana have over 1,000 wolves. That's why they have an aggressive control program, because of the depredation on their livestock associated with having that many wolves in their state. In Wyoming, we do a very good job of managing them. We have about 350 head, but we are able to manage them as predators in the vast majority of the state because that's what they are. Mr. Dobson, in Wyoming and other western states, we have seen firsthand how predator reintroductions under ESA 10J rules devastate rural economies and private landowners. Your experience in Arizona mirrors the struggles faced by ranchers in my home state. And when you talk about compensation, there are so many people who will claim that the compensation programs make up for livestock losses due to predator depredation, yet we know that they often fail to fully reimburse ranchers for their financial and operational burdens. In fact, there is no compensation for loss of weight or other impacts on livestock. There's no compensation for the disruption to breeding programs. And in fact, in Wyoming, we did a study on the gray wolf population after they were introduced in 1994, and we found that for every head of livestock that was killed, there were 7 to 8 that went missing, that were killed by the wolves, and none of that was subject to compensation by anyone. So it's had the introduction of Canadian gray wolves in Wyoming under Rule 10J has had a terrible impact on our livestock industry and on our other wildlife. Have you or other ranchers in your area received adequate compensation for livestock losses due to experimental wolf populations?
No.
No, and that's been the experience that I've had as well, and the same with the grizzly bear. Going to the grizzly bear, they have been designated as threatened since 1975. They've been recovered for over 2 decades. Wyoming, in fact, does have an adequate regulatory mechanism in place to protect the grizzly bear, but the Fish and Wildlife Service and rogue courts refused to allow us to delist. In fact, the recovery goal was 500 bears. We have over 1,100 in the state of Wyoming. So again, you can imagine the impact on our livestock industry and our other wildlife populations. The previous administration's approach to ESA enforcement has often ignored the concerns of local communities and landowners. In fact, many administrations, and Dr. Servine, I would include you in this category, it doesn't seem that it really matters to you what the impact is to our livestock producers, to our local communities, when you have these predators that are either brought in from another place or allowed to exponentially increase their population because of the protections. Mr. Dobson and Mr. Clark, what would be some of your recommendations of how we can better manage these species to protect and provide the balance that some people give lip service to in terms of species protection at the same time that we are also protecting our other industries? Mr. Dobson, what are your ideas?
As far as the 10J, I'm not sure I have any suggestions on that. My suggestion would be we find some sort of compensation model that takes into effect those indirect costs that we have to deal with. Like I mentioned earlier with Farm Bureau, 3.5% drop in weaning weights, that's one fraction of it, right? I have to hire extra people specifically for wolves. I have to make extra trips to the mountain. I have to haul hay. I have to haul water. All of these things that I have to do out of my own pocket that don't even touch any of the costs that I have to pay out of pocket.
You know, one time I was talking to somebody who was an expert on the ESA, somebody who really wanted to have it interpreted as broadly as it possibly could and to put more and more, to list more and more species and to delist fewer. And I asked them, okay, well, what about compensation for landowners or livestock producers or the individuals that are affected by this? And they said, we don't believe it's appropriate to do a compensation program under the ESA. And I said, why not? if this is a national policy adopted pursuant to the 1972 Endangered Species Act, and you have some people who say, it doesn't matter what the cost is, it doesn't matter what the economic impact is, we must protect all species at all costs to make sure that they do not go extinct. And I said, if that is the national policy, why isn't there a national compensation program? And they said, because we recognize if there is, and if everybody has to bear that cost, that there will be less support for the Endangered Species Act. If the cost is only borne by a limited number of people, primarily in the Western United States, primarily some of the industries such as ranching, farming, energy production, they believed that that was a fair trade-off, because then the rest of America could believe that this was a good policy. A small number would bear the cost. Everybody else could, believe that they were doing the right thing without regard to what the economic cost was. And I think that's really what so many people who support these policies believe. With that, I yield back.